On Christmas Eve, my father passed me a note. Tidy the house, prepare the meal, wrap the presents. Your sister's visitors anticipate perfection. My mother chuckled, don't mess this up. I grinned. That evening, I reserved a flight to Rome. When they reached an empty, silent home, alarm rippled through, followed by their phones lighting up with my text. Every Christmas Eve, our family sticks to the same routine. We travel to the cabin in Vermont, unload countless boxes of decorations, practice the image of a warm, joyful family for the many guests my sister insists on hosting, and I'm handed a task list like I'm hired help. But last year, something inside me broke. It began with a note. My father gave it to me as if it were a cherished family custom. Clean the house, cook dinner, wrap the gifts. Your sister's guests expect flawlessness. My mother glanced over and laughed outright. Don't botch this. I smiled. Not because it was amusing, but because I'd already decided. I'm unsure when I started feeling like a live-in servant rather than a son. Perhaps it was the year after I finished college when they persuaded me to stay home to support the family. I'd been employed full-time since 20, yet every paycheck somehow became part of their budget. Bills, food, family expenses. But when my sister wanted an impromptu trip to Cabo or new tires, my funds dwindled. My name was never in the group chats where those choices were made. I just got the receipts. They always claimed I owed them for raising me, for the roof over my head, for the chance to save money without rent draining me. But whenever I mentioned moving out, they acted as if I'd betrayed them. My father once called it deserting the ship. My mother said I was self-centered. And my sister, who never paid for anything herself, accused me of trying to seem significant. So I went along, until that note landed in my hand. I told them I'd head to the cabin a day early to set things up. They barely glanced up from their screens. Fine, whatever. I booked my flight that night, one way to Rome. I'd always dreamed of going. A friend who'd relocated there the previous year kept urging me to visit. I'd saved up discreetly bit by bit, selling items quietly, working extra shifts without telling anyone. I had just enough for 2 weeks. It was bold, but the alternative. Another Christmas as an unpaid host to people who saw me as a tool. When I arrived in Italy, I disabled roaming, settled into a modest but cozy Airbnb near Trastevere, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. I waited. Let the hours pass. Let the day arrive. Back in the States, they were due at the cabin around noon. I pictured the long driveway, the wreaths already slipping from last year, the quiet rooms that should have smelled of cinnamon and evergreen but were cold and empty. By 12:14 p.m. Eastern Time, I sent the message. Merry Christmas. Wishing you peace, insight, and a hint of humility. I'm not there and I won't be. I'm spending the holiday where I'm valued. Please don't contact me. I'll return January 3rd. Love, Michael. Then I powered off my phone. The next 9 days felt like something I hadn't experienced in ages. Freedom. But the real storm was still brewing that awaited my return. The moment I stepped off the plane in Rome, everything felt calmer. Not just the noise, but inside me, like my mind finally relaxed. I stood in the arrivals terminal with just a backpack. No one expecting me, no list in my grip. No eyes watching or demanding anything. It felt like a glitch in the system, like I'd slipped through a crack in the world where I owed no one anything. Luca met me near Piazza Venezia. He looked different, more serene, healthier than when he lived in New Jersey. We hadn't seen each other in over a year, but he didn't ask why I was there. He just handed me an espresso and said he'd reserved a spot for dinner. We didn't discuss family. He didn't pry. For the first few days, I stayed quiet. I just wandered. Rome was in that odd lull between Christmas and New Year's, festive but relaxed. I explored churches I couldn't name, sat on random benches watching strangers, stood on bridges at night as lights from passing boats danced on the water. I didn't share anything online. Didn't call home. Just breathed like I hadn't in years. But even in that calm, something nagged at me. I kept checking my phone. Not unlocking it, just staring at the dark screen for alerts. I disabled roaming and avoided Wi-Fi deliberately, but every morning I pressed the side button and stared. Waiting. Wondering. Not because I wanted to return, but because I wanted to know how far the chaos had spread. It took 3 days before I gave in. I connected to Luca's Wi-Fi just long enough for notifications to pour in. My mother had called 13 times. My father 11. My sister, who only called when she needed something, left 2 voicemails and a text that read, "Where are you?" Other messages came too. A few aunts, 2 cousins, 1 uncle's wife. The tone shifted over the days. First confusion. Then guilt, then fury. Full sentences became short, biting words. Accusations, sarcasm, demands. My father wrote, "You'd better have a damn good reason." My mother, "Everyone's asking where you are. This is embarrassing." My sister, "If I have to handle this mess alone, I swear." But one stood out, a photo from my mother, the cabin taken at night, pitch black. No lights, no decorations, nothing, just the shell of what they'd expected. No firewood stacked. No gifts arranged. No meal on the table, just emptiness. She captioned it, "Is this what you wanted?" I read it 3 times, I didn't reply. Luca noticed I was distracted. That night, over drinks with his friends in a lively bar near Trastevere, he asked if I'd ever return. Not just physically, but to how things were. I admitted something I hadn't said aloud before. I told him I didn't think they missed me. I think they just missed what I did for them. The planning, the errands, the backup plans, the way I kept everything running while they played the part of a normal, happy family. Luca didn't respond. He just nodded and handed me another drink. On New Year's Eve, we stood on a rooftop as fireworks burst across the sky. People shouted in multiple languages, tossed confetti, danced in the chill. At midnight, someone tried to call me. I watched the screen light up, then go dark. I thought about how I used to spend that night, setting up the fire pit, refilling champagne for my sister's friends, driving tipsy cousins home. And now, wrapped in someone else's jacket, kissing a girl whose name I barely knew, with no one demanding anything from me. The next morning, I booked my return flight, January 3rd. At the airport, I turned off airplane mode. My phone buzzed like it was suffocating. Messages flooded in, voicemails, missed calls, unread texts, but one stood out, from my sister. "They sold your car. Hope your little getaway was worth it." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I closed it and didn't look again until I landed. That was when I realized this wouldn't be a heartfelt discussion. It was going to be a fight. I returned to the States late afternoon, January 3rd, took a shuttle from the airport, then a local bus, and walked the final stretch to my parents' house with a small suitcase and my winter coat half-zipped. I paused at the front door for a moment before opening it, not from nerves but because I felt nothing. I stepped inside and the smell hit me first. Someone had been cooking, likely my mother, but the house was too quiet. Like it was holding its breath. Then it erupted. My mother stormed out of the kitchen first. She didn't greet me, didn't ask about the flight, just a sharp yell of my name that echoed like I'd broken in. My father followed, his expression torn between lecturing me or throwing me out. He didn't need to speak. I knew where they wanted me. I sat in the living room and waited. My sister came downstairs last, in pajamas and an old hoodie, looking like she'd been holed up since Christmas Eve. She seemed exhausted, irritated, and ready for a fight. Then the shouting began, all at once. Questions they didn't want answers to. "Where the hell were you? Do you think this is a joke? You humiliated us. Do you know how many people asked where you were? You ruined everything. We had to clean. We had to host. Your sister had to cook dinner herself. You put all the pressure on us. How could you be so self-centered?" I stayed silent for the first few minutes. I let them pour it all out. Let them turn my absence into the worst thing that ever happened to them. Then I spoke. I told them I'd gone to Rome, that I used my own money, that I spent Christmas with people who didn't treat me like a servant, that I didn't owe them an explanation for taking time for myself, that for years I'd been paying bills I never agreed to, covering debts that weren't mine, and getting nothing but guilt and obligation in return. I said they didn't notice me when I was there, only when I stopped saying yes. My mother called me dramatic. My father said I was acting like a teenager. My sister smirked and called it my main character phase. That's when something in me shifted. I stood and said I was done. Done being the one who kept everything running while they treated me like background noise. I wasn't staying another night. I went upstairs, opened my closet, and grabbed the 2 duffel bags I'd packed before Rome, just in case they pulled something like this. I knew them too well. I'd been preparing for this moment for years without realizing it. When I came downstairs with the bags, no one stopped me. I called a cab and stood by the door until it arrived. No one said goodbye. No one asked where I was going. They just stood in the hallway, waiting for me to leave like an unwanted delivery. I gave the driver my girlfriend's address. She lived across town in a small apartment she shared with a friend who was away for the holidays. She opened the door, saw my bags, and didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside and let me in. I sat on the couch, took off my coat, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel the need to justify myself to anyone. That night, I fell asleep before midnight and didn't wake once. But I knew it wasn't over. I hadn't even unpacked, and the battle was already waiting on the other side of my phone. I woke up on January 4th to my girlfriend making coffee and my phone glowing with notifications. I hadn't touched it since the night before, but the screen was flooded. 37 missed calls, voicemails, messages piling up like a barrier to my peace. 22 from my mother, 10 from my father, a few from unfamiliar numbers. Probably cousins, maybe neighbors, who knows who they'd roped in. All with the same goal: make this about them, make me the villain for stepping away. I didn't open a single one, I let it buzz until it died. Then the message came. From my sister: "They sold your car, it's gone, you want to play grown-up? Pay for your own ride." I read it twice. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I realized something. They weren't trying to understand why I left. They didn't care, they were trying to punish me. I didn't believe it at first. The car was mine. I paid for it in full 2 summers ago. I kept it pristine, registered in my name. The title was in my drawer at home, locked. But then I remembered. That drawer had a cheap key they'd copied years ago without telling me. My room wasn't mine. My belongings weren't safe. I called the dealership where I bought the car, posing as someone handling paperwork. The guy checked without hesitation. "Yep, sold December 29th. In-person sale, cash, signed by my father." My hands went cold, not from shock, there was none left, but from clarity. My absence threatened their comfort, so they struck back the only way they knew, financially. Because that was always the language in our house. Power wasn't love or respect, it was control over money, movement, choices. I didn't call them. Didn't yell. I went to my girlfriend's small kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared at the wall. She kept asking if I wanted to pursue legal action, call the police, reclaim what was mine, but I couldn't. Not from fear, but because I knew how it would play out. They'd cry. My mother would twist it into betrayal. My father would say I was tearing the family apart. My sister would claim I was ruining her reputation. And somehow I'd still be the bad guy, so instead I did something quiet, permanent. I changed my bank account password, transferred every cent to a credit union they didn't know existed, closed the joint card they could access, canceled my old phone plan, created a new email, archived every message they'd sent, blocked them all. Then I sat for 10 minutes, hands clasped, not moving, not thinking, just existing without them in my mind. Later that day, I started looking for apartments. Not someday apartments. Real ones, studios, 1-bedrooms, anything with a door I could lock and never have to justify myself behind. By evening, I had 3 tours scheduled. And that night, one last email slipped through. From my mother: "You've made your point. Come home before you regret this." I didn't reply, I read it once, then deleted it. Because for the first time in 25 years, I wasn't afraid of regret. 2 days later, I stood outside a small 3rd-floor walk-up with plain walls and creaky floors. The air smelled of paint and dust, and the windows rattled if you tapped them too hard. The place was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I signed the lease that afternoon, paid the deposit with money they didn't know I had, and told the landlord I'd move in by week's end. He handed me the keys. I held them in my hand, half expecting them to vanish. That night I didn't sleep, not from nerves, because I knew what came next and it wouldn't be quiet. The next morning I took a rideshare to my parents' house. My girlfriend offered to come, but I said I had to do it alone. She didn't argue. I walked in using the spare key I still had. They weren't expecting me. My mother was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. My father was in the living room watching some news channel. My sister was upstairs, probably asleep or pretending to be. It was silent for a few seconds after I opened the door. Then came the scream, not fear. Anger, raw, sharp, and instant. My mother demanded to know what I thought I was doing, walking in after everything, after ignoring them, blocking them, embarrassing them. My father stood like he was about to launch into a lecture. I didn't wait. I walked past them up to my room, grabbed the bags I'd left packed since Rome, and stuffed in the last of my things. Not much. A few books, my laptop charger, some clothes. I didn't look at the photos on the walls. Didn't bother explaining. My sister appeared at the top of the stairs, arms crossed like she expected praise for surviving the holidays without me. She asked where I was moving. I didn't answer. My mother followed me halfway to the door, listing everything I was throwing away. My family, my support, my duties. She used that word, duties. My father asked how I thought I'd survive out there alone. He said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I was running from reality. I turned in the doorway, bags over my shoulders. No. I said I'm stepping into it. Then I closed the door behind me, not slammed, just closed. I got into the rideshare and gave the driver my new address. 10 minutes later, I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and dropped my bags on the floor. I stood there staring at the bare walls. No voices, no background noise, no demands, no guilt. Later that evening, my girlfriend came over with groceries and a folding chair. We ate on the floor. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you." She didn't need to. The silence said enough. That night, for the first time, I slept in a space that felt like mine. No one knew where I was, and that was the best part. It's odd how quiet can feel like a gift. The first few nights in my new apartment, I didn't play the TV or music. I just soaked in the stillness. No footsteps outside my door, no shouting downstairs. No one calling my name because the Wi-Fi was down or they didn't feel like running errands. Just me. A mattress on the floor, 2 folding chairs, a cheap table, and a kitchen that stayed clean. I stood in the middle of the room that first morning, sipping coffee I brewed with a machine I bought, and thought, I can breathe here. I didn't tell my family where I was. Not to punish them, but because I needed to know what life felt like without their constant oversight, guilt, or demands. No one deserved access to this new version of me until I decided they'd earned it. I blocked every number, every email, even changed my bank account entirely. New bank, new logins, new everything, just severing the last ties. I knew they'd try to creep back and once things calmed down, but I made it impossible. There was no gap for them to exploit. My girlfriend started visiting more often. We cooked in that tiny kitchen. Sometimes we ate noodles straight from the pot on the floor because I didn't have plates yet. She never judged, never acted like this place wasn't enough. And for once I could let her in. Completely. Not just as someone I saw when sneaking around my family's expectations, but as part of my real life. One night I asked if she thought my parents would ever show up. She said maybe, but they won't find you. And she was right. The truth is, they never really saw me. Not when I lived there. Not when I worked 2 jobs to cover bills they called family contributions. Not when I stayed behind while my friends moved out and built lives, just so my sister didn't have to worry about the guest bathroom being clean for her friends. Not once. So I stopped letting them. I started fresh. I embraced the quiet. I built a routine. I paid rent. I set my own rules. I met neighbors. I hosted friends. I kept things simple, calm. Some nights I stayed up late just because I could. I'd walk barefoot across the cold floor at 2 a.m., eat cereal, and watch the lights outside flicker through the blinds. And every time I'd smile. I still had rough days. Still missed the idea of what a family should be. But I didn't miss them. The calls eventually stopped. No new numbers, no emails, just silence. And that silence, it became peace. Now, months later, I look around this small apartment and realize I have everything I need. Not because it's perfect, but because it's mine. My space, my choices, my life. I'm not the same person who cleaned the house while everyone else sat around pretending Christmas just happened. I'm not the guy who handed over his paycheck for the sake of gratitude. I'm not a convenience anymore. I'm free. And I swear nothing they could say or do now would ever pull me back. I don't care if they cry. I don't care if they blame me. I don't care if they want to talk. Because the moment I walked out of that house, I stopped being their safety net. And the silence they're hearing now, it's the sound of my life finally starting. 2 weeks of silence passed. No calls, no emails, no random texts from cousins checking if I was okay. I was settling in. The studio still smelled of fresh paint and leftover takeout. I'd bought a real bed frame, some second-hand furniture, and a rug that didn't match anything. But it warmed the place. For the first time, peace felt like my baseline. I started sleeping better. My girlfriend could visit whenever. I was working, paying bills, truly living. The noise had finally faded. Then one Friday morning, something broke through. I was at work wrapping up a project when my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I usually wouldn't answer, but I was expecting a delivery, so I picked up. It wasn't a delivery. It was a lawyer. He introduced himself and said my name. I froze for a second. He asked if I had time to discuss a family-related financial matter. I said I didn't owe anyone money. That's when he dropped it. I've been asked to contact you about an informal family loan arrangement from the past 5 years. I asked what he was talking about. He said my parents claimed I had an outstanding debt to them, that they'd provided housing, transportation, and financial support since I was 18, and they now wanted to formalize repayment. I laughed, right there in my office. He paused, then asked if I'd consider a settlement discussion to avoid escalation. I told him there was nothing to settle, that they were reaching, that if they wanted to sue their own son for rent I never agreed to and money they took willingly, they could try. I hung up. I didn't hear from the lawyer again, but that night my blocked inbox lit up. A new email account, clearly my mother's. The tone was bitter, dramatic, pages long. She said I'd forced them to take this step, that they hated doing this but couldn't let me shirk my duties like a child. She said they were entitled to compensation for everything they'd done to give me a good life. She even included a rough estimate. Rent, groceries, emotional damage, and the kicker, interest. They wanted over $47,000. I stared at the screen, not angry, not scared, just stunned. They really thought this would scare me back into submission. They really thought they still had control over me. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to a friend in legal and asked if I should be concerned. He laughed harder than I did. No contract, no written agreement, no case. Just another manipulation tactic, a threat with no weight. A few days later, my girlfriend came over with champagne and 2 paper cups. "You're free now," she said. And I was. Not just physically, but legally, emotionally, mentally. They had fired their last shot, and it missed by a mile. And now I saw it for what it was. A sad, desperate attempt to claw back a son they never knew how to value. Let them try whatever they want. I'm done playing their game.